Lord willing and the creek don't rise, but something ain't right with this morning. Grace Mackenzie had seen plenty of sunrises in her 45 years, but she'd never seen her German shepherd act like this. Captain paced the length of her desert ranch's front porch, his powerful body trembling with an energy that made her stomach clench. His dark eyes fixed on the distant horizon, pupils dilated with what looked like pure terror. "Easy, boy," Grace whispered, stepping barefoot onto the weathered planks. The pre-dawn air bit at her skin, but Captain's distress sent ice through her veins. His ears flattened against his skull, and a low whine escaped his throat, a sound she hadn't heard since she'd found him half dead 3 years ago. Captain had been a K-9 unit before the shooting, before his partner died, before the nightmares that still made him cry out in his sleep. But this wasn't a flashback. This was something else entirely. The big dog suddenly froze. His nose lifted to catch a scent that wasn't there. His hackles rose like he was facing down the devil himself. "What is it? Boy." Grace's voice cracked. "What do you see that I can't?" Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Grace had learned to trust animals more than people, and for good reason. 3 years ago, she'd been Arizona's most dedicated social worker until the Henderson case broke her heart clean in two. 4 children, just like the ones that haunted her dreams. She'd followed protocol, trusted the system, believed the lies. By the time she realized the truth, it was too late. The kids were gone, and a piece of her soul went with them. That's when she'd found Captain. Or maybe he'd found her. The big German shepherd had been wandering the desert roads, ribs showing through his coat, eyes hollow with grief that matched her own. His former partner, Officer Michael Torres, had died in a convenience store shooting 6 months earlier. Captain had been there, heard the gunshots. Couldn't save him. The dog had been living rough ever since, refusing to eat, refusing to trust. 2 broken souls, she'd whispered that first night, watching him sleep fitfully in her kitchen. Guess we deserve each other. Now, as Captain's agitation reached fever pitch, Grace felt that familiar knot in her stomach. During her social work days, she'd learned to read the signs, the way children's eyes would dart to corners, how they'd flinch at sudden movements. Animals were no different. They knew danger before humans even smelled it coming. Captain had saved her from rattlesnakes twice, warned her about flash floods, even growled at a man who'd later been arrested for assault. His instincts were sharper than any radar, honed by years of police work and sharpened by trauma. "Better safe than sorry," Grace muttered, watching him pace. The sun was climbing higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Beautiful morning for such an ugly feeling. She'd built this life deliberately. Isolated, quiet, safe. The nearest neighbor was Beauregard Winchester, and everyone called him a pillar of the community. Donated to charities, took in strays, helped families in need. The kind of man who made her former colleagues sing his praises. But Captain had never liked him. The dog stopped pacing and looked directly at her, his intelligent eyes pleading. He'd never been wrong before. Not about the rattlers, not about the floods, not about the man with violent hands. Grace pulled on her boots and grabbed her truck keys. "All right, boy. I reckon if you're this worked up, we better find out why." Captain bolted toward the truck before she'd finished speaking, his powerful legs carrying him across the dusty yard. He jumped into the passenger seat and fixed his gaze on the road leading to town. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. As Grace started the engine, a chill ran down her spine despite the warming morning air. Whatever had Captain spooked, it was big, and somewhere in her gut, she knew it involved children. 3 years ago, Grace Mackenzie had been driving home from the worst day of her career when she spotted the dog on Highway 191. Rain was coming down in sheets, and the German Shepherd was lying in the middle of the road like he'd given up on living. She'd pulled over without thinking, the way she always did when something needed saving. "Come on, boy," she'd called, but he hadn't moved, just laid there in the rain, ribs showing through matted fur, eyes staring at nothing. When she'd gotten closer, she'd seen the collar, K9 unit, Cochise County Sheriff's Department. Below that, a name tag Captain. It had taken her 20 minutes to coax him into the truck. Not because he was aggressive, but because he seemed to have forgotten how to trust. She'd sat in the rain beside him, talking softly about nothing and everything, until finally his tail had given the smallest wag. At the vet's office, the story came out. Officer Michael Torres had been Captain's partner for 4 years. They'd worked narcotics, search and rescue, community outreach. Torres had been 28, married with a baby girl on the way. 3 months ago, he'd stopped for coffee at the Circle K on Fry Boulevard. Wrong place, wrong time. 2 bullets to the chest from a strung-out kid robbing the register. Captain had been in the patrol car, heard the shots, but couldn't get out. The doors were locked, windows up. He'd gone crazy trying to get to his partner, barking and clawing until his paws bled. By the time backup arrived, Torres was gone and Captain was broken. "Dog's been through hell," the vet had said. "Won't eat, won't work. Department tried to place him with other officers, but he just shuts down. They were talking about putting him down when he disappeared." Grace had looked at those hollow brown eyes and seen herself. "Not happening," she'd said. "He's coming home with me." The first month had been rough. Captain would pace all night, whimpering at sounds only he could hear. He'd refuse food for days, then eat like he was starving. Sometimes he'd stare at the front door for hours, waiting for a partner who would never come home. Grace understood. After the Henderson case, she'd done her own version of the same thing. 4 kids, Sarah, 9, Marcus, 7, the twins, Emma and Ethan, 5. Their grandmother had begged the court for custody, but the system had rules. The biological father had rights, even if he was a monster. Grace had fought for months, filed every report, followed every protocol. The judge had been sympathetic but firm. "We can't remove children based on speculation. Ms. Mackenzie, Mr. Henderson has completed anger management, found steady employment. The law requires us to reunify families when possible." 3 weeks later, all 4 children were dead. Henderson had locked them in a storage unit during an Arizona heat wave, temperatures hitting 115 degrees. By the time someone heard the crying, it was too late. Grace had found their bodies. She'd been the one to tell their grandmother. She'd been the one to carry little Emma to the ambulance, the child's small hand still clutching a paper flower she'd made in school. That night, Grace had driven to the desert and screamed until her voice gave out. The next morning, she'd submitted her resignation and never looked back. Now, watching Captain pace the truck cab as they drove toward town, she remembered those early days of healing together, how they'd learned to trust again, slowly, carefully. How Captain's nightmares had gradually faded as he realized he had a new purpose, protecting her. The breakthrough had come 6 months after she'd found him. Grace had been working in her garden when Captain had started barking frantically at the woodpile. She'd almost ignored him, but something in his voice made her look. Coiled beneath the logs was a diamondback rattler, thick as her wrist and mad as hell. "Good boy," she'd whispered, and for the first time since Torres died, Captain's tail had wagged with real joy. From then on, he'd appointed himself her guardian. He'd warned her about flash floods, alerted her to coyotes near the chicken coop, even growled at a door-to-door salesman who'd turned out to have warrants in 3 states. His instincts were uncanny, sharpened by loss into something almost supernatural. The folks in town had mixed feelings about Grace Mackenzie. Some respected her for taking in the broken police dog. Others whispered that she'd lost her mind out there in the desert, talking to animals like they could talk back. Grace didn't much care what they thought. Captain had never steered her wrong. Well, except when it came to Beauregard Winchester. Beau was everything the community admired. 3rd-generation rancher, old Arizona money, generous to a fault. His family had built half the town back in the 1890s, and he carried that legacy with quiet pride. He donated to the Children's Hospital, sponsored the high school rodeo team, and never missed a church service. But every time Captain saw him, the dog's hackles would rise. Grace had always figured it was just Beau's cologne, or maybe the way he moved. Some dogs were funny about tall men. Beau had never complained, just chuckled and kept his distance. "That dog of yours sure doesn't like me," he'd said at the grocery store last month. "Can't say I blame him. I probably smell like cattle and diesel fuel." Grace had apologized, but privately she'd wondered. Captain's instincts had never been wrong before. Now, as they approached the town limits, Captain's agitation reached new heights. He whined and paced, pressing his nose to the window like he was trying to catch a specific scent. When they passed the turnoff to Winchester Ranch, he started barking, sharp, urgent sounds that made Grace's blood run cold. "What is it, boy? What's got you so worked up?" She pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, where half the town gathered for morning coffee and gossip. Through the window, she could see the usual crowd, ranchers, retirees, shop owners starting their day. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. But Captain was practically vibrating with tension. Grace had learned the hard way that normal didn't mean safe. The Henderson house had looked normal too. Neat lawn, clean windows, children's bikes in the driveway, right up until it became a tomb. She thought about those children often, especially in the quiet hours before dawn. Sarah's gap-toothed smile, Marcus's collection of bottle caps, the way the twins would finish each other's sentences. They'd trusted the system to protect them, and the system had failed. Grace had promised herself it would never happen again. Not on her watch. She looked at Captain, his intelligent eyes fixed on something she couldn't see, and made her decision. "All right, boy. Let's go find out what's got you so spooked. But Lord help us both if you're chasing shadows." As she opened the truck door, Captain jumped out and immediately started trotting toward Main Street, his nose to the ground like he was following a trail. Grace hurried to keep up, her heart pounding with a familiar dread. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together. Captain led Grace straight to the courthouse steps, where an elderly woman sat hunched over like the weight of the world was crushing her shoulders. Even from a distance, Grace could see the tremor in the woman's hands, the way she clutched a faded photograph against her chest. "Ma'am," Grace approached carefully, "are you all right?" The woman looked up with red-rimmed eyes. She was maybe 70, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and clothes that had seen better decades. The kind of woman who'd raised children through the Depression and never complained about it. "I'm Dolores Patterson," she said, her voice cracking. "Folks call me Dolly. I reckon I'm about as far from all right as a person can get." Grace sat down beside her on the concrete steps. Captain settled at their feet, still alert but no longer pacing. "What's troubling you?" "Dolly." "My grandchildren." Dolly held up the photograph. 4 children of stair-step ages, all smiles and missing teeth. Their mama died birthing the youngest, and their daddy, well, he passed last winter. Pneumonia took him fast. Now it's just me and these babies. And I... Her voice broke entirely. Grace's stomach clenched. 4 children. Always 4 children. "How old are they?" "Liberty's 8. We call her Libby. Smart as a whip. That one takes care of the others like a little mama. Then there's Jackson, Jack. He goes by. 7 years old and observant as an owl. Sees everything, remembers everything. Magnolia is 6. Maggie, sweet as honey. And little Samuel, Sammy, just turned 5 last month." The names rolled off Dolly's tongue with the kind of love that Grace remembered from her own grandmother. But underneath the affection was pure terror. "They're sick," Dolly continued. "All 4 of them. Started with fevers about 2 weeks ago, then this cough that won't quit. I've spent every penny I had on doctors, but they need specialists, medicine I can't afford. I've been to every charity, every church, every government office. Nobody can help fast enough." Grace had heard variations of this story 100 times in her social work days. Families falling through the cracks. Children suffering while bureaucracy moved at a snail's pace. What about family services? Emergency medical assistance? They're working on it, but you know how that goes. Forms and more forms. Waiting lists longer than a Sunday sermon. These babies don't have weeks to wait. Dolly wiped her eyes with a tissue worn thin from use. "I was sitting here praying for a miracle when you walked up." Captain whined softly and moved closer to Dolly, resting his big head on her knee. She looked down at him with surprise. "Well, hello there. Handsome. Aren't you a sweetheart?" "That's Captain," Grace said. "He's got a sense about people. If he likes you, you're good people." "Lord knows I try to be." Dolly scratched behind Captain's ears, and his tail gave a small wag. "I raised 6 children of my own, buried 3 of them. These 4 grandchildren are all I got left of my boy. I can't lose them, too. I just can't." Grace felt the familiar burn of helpless rage. Children dying while adults shuffled papers and checked boxes. She was about to offer what little help she could when a shadow fell across them. Ladies, good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Grace looked up to see Beauregard Winchester approaching, dressed in his usual expensive casual wear, pressed khakis, polo shirt, boots that probably cost more than most people's rent. He was a handsome man in his late 50s, silver-haired and well-maintained, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Captain's reaction was immediate and violent. He lurched to his feet, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Grace grabbed his collar, confused by the intensity of his response. "Easy, Captain. Down." Beau smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "That's quite a guard dog you have there." Grace, very protective. "I'm sorry. Beau, I don't know what's gotten into him today. No harm done." Beau's attention shifted to Dolly, and his expression softened into practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Patterson, isn't it I heard through the grapevine that you're having some difficulties with your grandchildren's medical care?" Dolly looked up with sudden hope. "Mr. Winchester, I didn't expect. I mean, I know you're a busy man. Never too busy to help a neighbor in need. That's what community means, after all." Beau's voice carried the warm authority of someone accustomed to being the solution to people's problems. "I understand the children need specialized care." "Yes, sir. They're all sick with something the local doctors can't figure out. Need to see specialists. But I can't afford—" "Say no more." Beau held up a hand, his expression grave. "I've made my fortune in this community, and I believe in giving back. Consider their medical expenses covered." Grace watched the exchange with growing unease. Captain's growling had intensified, and she had to use both hands to hold him back. The dog's instincts had never been wrong before. "I can't possibly accept such generosity," Dolly protested, though her eyes shone with desperate hope. "Nonsense. Those children need help, and I'm in a position to provide it. I insist." Beau pulled out a business card and handed it to Dolly. "My secretary will arrange everything. Transportation to Phoenix, the best pediatric specialists, whatever they need." "God bless you, Mr. Winchester. You're an angel sent from heaven." "Just a man trying to do right by his neighbors." Beau glanced at his expensive watch. "In fact, I've already taken the liberty of contacting a colleague at Phoenix Children's Hospital. They can see the children this afternoon, but we'll need to move quickly." Grace's unease spiked. Something about the timing felt wrong, too convenient. "This afternoon, that seems awfully fast." "Sometimes emergency cases require immediate action," Beau replied smoothly. "The specialist had a cancellation, and I was able to secure the slot. These children can't wait for the normal appointment process." Dolly clutched the business card like a lifeline. "What do I need to do?" "I've arranged for my nurse to collect the children and transport them to Phoenix. She's experienced with pediatric care and will ensure they're comfortable during the journey. You're welcome to follow in your own vehicle." "Of course." Captain's growling reached a crescendo, and he strained against Grace's grip with unusual force. She'd never seen him react this way to anyone, and it was starting to frighten her. "Mrs. Patterson," Grace said carefully, "maybe you should take some time to think about this. Get a second opinion. Check references. Time is the one thing we don't have," Beau interrupted, his voice carrying a subtle edge. "The children's condition could worsen at any moment. as I understand it. They're already quite ill." "They are," Dolly agreed, torn between hope and desperation. "But maybe the lady's right. Maybe I should—" "Of course. It's entirely your decision," Bo said, his tone gentle but insistent. "I'm simply offering to help. If you prefer to wait for government assistance or try to raise funds through other means, that's certainly your prerogative. I just hate to see children suffer when help is available." The manipulation was subtle but effective. Grace recognized the technique from her social work days, creating urgency, making the desperate feel like they had no choice but to accept help from their rescuer. Dolly looked down at the photograph of her grandchildren, then back at Bo. "When would they need to leave?" "Within the hour. I'm afraid the specialist's schedule is quite tight." I need to get them ready. They're staying at the motel on 3rd Street. "Excellent. I'll have Martha Sinclair, she's a registered nurse, meet you there in 30 minutes. She'll handle all the arrangements." As Bo walked away, Captain finally calmed down, but his eyes never left the man's retreating figure. Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Dolly," she said quietly, "are you sure about this?" The older woman clutched the business card tighter. "What choice do I have? My babies are dying, and he's offering to save them. Sometimes you have to trust in the kindness of strangers." But as Grace watched Bo disappear around the corner, Captain's warnings echoing in her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that kindness wasn't what they were dealing with at all. Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. After Dolly hurried off to collect her grandchildren, Grace sat on the courthouse steps with Captain, who had finally stopped growling but remained tense as a coiled spring. The morning sun was climbing higher, and with it, her sense of dread. "What is it about Bo Winchester that's got you so worked up?" "Boy," she murmured, scratching behind Captain's ears. The dog whined softly and nudged her hand toward the direction Bo had gone. Grace had learned to trust Captain's instincts, but this time she needed more than gut feelings. She pulled out her phone and started making calls to old contacts from her social work days. If Bo Winchester was running some kind of charity operation, there should be records, references, something to verify his claims. 20 minutes later, she had her answer, and it made her blood run cold. "Grace Mackenzie, as I live and breathe." The voice belonged to Janet Rodriguez, her former supervisor at Child Protective Services. "Haven't heard from you in years, honey. How's retirement treating you?" "Can't complain. Janet, listen, I need a favor. You ever heard of a Beauregard Winchester out of Cochise County claims he's involved in children's medical charities?" There was a pause. "Winchester. Yeah, that name rings a bell. Hold on, let me check our database." Grace waited, watching Captain pace nervously in front of her. "Here we go," Janet said, her voice dropping. "Grace, where did you come across this name?" "He just offered to pay for medical treatment for 4 sick children. Seemed too good to be true." "It is. We've had Winchester on our radar for 2 years now. Nothing we could prove. But there's been a pattern. He approaches desperate families, offers to help with medical expenses. Then the children disappear." Grace's stomach lurched. "Disappear how?" "Transport accidents, mostly. Kids being taken to specialists in Phoenix or Tucson, vehicles breaking down in remote areas. By the time help arrives, it's too late. Heat stroke, dehydration. Always looks like terrible luck." Jesus Christ. Janet. How many children? At least 6 that we know of. Maybe more. The insurance payouts have been substantial. Winchester takes out policies on the children as soon as he gains temporary custody, claims it's to cover medical expenses. When they die, he's the beneficiary. Grace felt sick. Why isn't he in prison? No direct evidence. He's careful, uses intermediaries, and he's got money, connections. Every investigation gets buried under legal challenges and political pressure. We know what he's doing, but knowing and proving are 2 different things. Captain suddenly barked sharply. Looking toward the street, Grace followed his gaze and saw a white van pulling up to the Sunset Motel across town. Even from this distance, she could make out a woman in scrubs getting out of the driver's side. "Janet, I've got to go. 4 children are about to get into a van with his people." "Grace, don't do anything stupid. Call the police and tell them that my dog doesn't like a pillar of the community." Grace was already running toward her truck, Captain at her heels. "I'll call you back." She gunned the engine and raced across town, but by the time she reached the motel, the van was gone. Dolly stood in the parking lot, waving at the disappearing vehicle with tears streaming down her face. "They're going to be fine," Dolly called out as Grace screeched to a halt. "That nurse, Martha, she was so kind. Promised to take good care of them." Grace's heart sank. "Dolly, we need to talk. Right now." Something in Grace's tone made the older woman's smile falter. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" "Get in the truck. I'll explain on the way." Explain on. As they drove, Grace laid out everything Janet had told her. She watched Dolly's face transform from confusion to disbelief to horror. "No," Dolly whispered. "No. That can't be right. He seemed so genuine, so concerned about the children." "The best predators always do," Grace said grimly. She'd seen it too many times in her social work career. Monsters hiding behind charitable facades, preying on desperate families. But why? Why would someone do such a thing? Money. Insurance fraud. Winchester takes out policies on the children, then arranges accidents. Clean, legal, profitable. Captain whined from the back seat, his nose pressed to the window as they followed the highway toward Phoenix. Grace knew they were on the right track, because the dog's agitation was increasing with every mile. Dolly pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling the police." "Good idea. But don't get your hopes up. Winchester's been doing this for years without consequences. He's got the system figured out." The call to 911 was frustrating but predictable. The dispatcher was polite but unhelpful. No crime had been committed yet. The children were with a registered nurse. Mr. Winchester was a respected member of the community. They'd make a note of the concern. "What do we do now?" Dolly asked, her voice breaking. Grace pressed harder on the accelerator. "We find them ourselves." They drove in tense silence for another 20 minutes before Captain started barking frantically. Grace looked ahead and saw the white van pulled over at a scenic overlook about 50 miles outside of town. The van doors were open, but she couldn't see anyone moving around it. "That's them," Dolly breathed. "That's the van." Grace parked behind a cluster of rocks and grabbed her binoculars from the glove compartment. Through the lenses, she could see the truth. And it was worse than she'd imagined. The van was empty. completely empty. Martha Sinclair, the supposed nurse, was nowhere to be seen. But tire tracks in the dirt showed where another vehicle had been parked, something big, like an SUV or pickup truck. "Where are they?" Dolly whispered. "Where are my babies?" Grace swept the binoculars across the desert landscape, her social worker training kicking in. Winchester was too smart to leave bodies where they might be found quickly. He'd want someplace remote, where the desert heat would do his work for him and make everything look like an accident. Then she saw it. Fresh tire tracks leading off the main road toward a cluster of rocky outcroppings about 2 miles south. Perfect place to abandon 4 sick children where they wouldn't be found for days, maybe weeks. "I see tracks," Grace said, lowering the binoculars, "leading toward those rocks. We have to go after them. Dolly, I need you to stay here and keep trying to reach the police. Tell them we found the abandoned van. Demand they send someone out here. I'm not staying behind while my grandchildren are out there dying." Grace looked at the 70-year-old woman's determined face and recognized the same fierce protectiveness she'd seen in herself years ago. "All right, but we do this smart. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say." Captain was already out of the truck, nose to the ground, following the scent trail toward the rocks. His training as a canine unit was taking over, and Grace had never been more grateful for his skills. They hiked across the desert floor, following the tire tracks in Captain's lead. The sun was getting higher, temperature climbing toward what would be a brutal afternoon. If those children were out here without water, they didn't have much time. After about a mile, Captain suddenly stopped and went rigid, his hackles rising. Grace crept forward and peered around a boulder. There, in a small clearing surrounded by rocks, 4 children huddled together in whatever shade they could find. They were conscious but clearly in distress, flushed faces, labored breathing, the telltale signs of dehydration setting in. But they were alive. "Thank God," Dolly whispered, starting forward. Grace grabbed her arm. "Wait! Where's the nurse? Where's Martha?" They watched for several minutes, but there was no sign of the woman who had taken the children. She'd simply dumped them here and left, probably to report back to Winchester that the job was done. "That bitch," Grace muttered. "She just left them here to die." The oldest girl, Libby, was trying to keep the younger ones calm, rationing sips from a single water bottle that was nearly empty. Grace's heart broke, watching the 8-year-old take on responsibilities no child should bear. "We're going in," Grace decided. "But we need to be careful. This could still be a trap." As they approached the clearing, Captain bounded ahead, his tail wagging for the first time all day. The children looked up with a mixture of fear and hope as the big German shepherd trotted over to them. "It's okay, babies," Dolly called out, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma's here. Everything's going to be okay now." But even as she ran toward her grandchildren, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. Winchester wouldn't take kindly to having his plans disrupted, and men like him didn't give up easily. The real battle was yet to come. The rescue wasn't going to be simple. Grace could see that the moment she got close enough to assess the children's condition. All 4 were showing signs of heat exhaustion, flushed skin, rapid breathing, confusion. Little Sammy was barely conscious, his 5-year-old body already shutting down from dehydration. "We need to get them cooled down and hydrated fast," Grace said, her social worker training kicking in. She'd seen heat stroke before, knew how quickly it could turn fatal. Dolly was already cradling Sammy, tears streaming down her weathered face. "He's burning up. His skin is so hot." Grace pulled out her phone to call 911, but there was no signal. They were too far from civilization, trapped in one of Arizona's many dead zones. "We're on our own," she muttered. Then louder, "Okay, everyone listen up. We're going to move these kids to my truck where there's air conditioning." But as she spoke, the sound of an engine echoed across the desert. Grace's blood turned to ice as she recognized the white van returning, kicking up a cloud of dust as it approached their position. "Get down!" she hissed, pulling Dolly and the children behind the largest boulder. Captain immediately positioned himself between them and the approaching vehicle, his military training evident in his stance through the settling dust. Grace watched Martha Sinclair step out of the van. The woman who'd posed as a caring nurse looked nothing like the gentle caregiver who'd collected the children. Her face was hard, calculating, as she surveyed the scene. "Well, well," Martha called out. "Looks like we have some uninvited guests." Grace's mind raced. This wasn't just abandonment, it was murder, plain and simple. And now they were witnesses. "You must be Grace Mackenzie," Martha continued, walking closer. "Bo told me about you and your dog. Said you might be a problem." Grace stepped out from behind the boulder, keeping her voice steady. "These children need medical attention. Whatever you're being paid, it's not worth this." Martha laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You have no idea what this is worth. Those insurance policies are worth more than you'll make in a lifetime." Insurance policies. But even as Grace asked, she knew. Winchester had taken out life insurance on the children, naming himself as beneficiary. The medical expenses story was just a cover. "Bo's very thorough," Martha said. "Temporary custody papers, medical power of attorney, insurance applications, all legal, all above board. When these kids die of heat exposure, he'll be the grieving benefactor who tried to save them." Behind Grace, Dolly gasped. "You're monsters. They're just babies." "They're paychecks," Martha replied coldly. "And you've just signed your own death warrant by interfering." That's when Grace saw the gun in Martha's hand. The next few moments unfolded like a nightmare. Martha raised the weapon, but Captain was already moving. The German shepherd launched himself at the woman with the speed and precision of his police training, knocking her to the ground before she could fire. "Run!" Grace shouted to Dolly. "Get the kids to the truck!" But Dolly was 70 years old and the children were weak from dehydration. They couldn't move fast enough, and Martha was already struggling to her feet, the gun still in her hand. Grace made a split-second decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. She charged Martha, tackling her just as the gun went off. The shot echoed across the desert, and for a moment, Grace thought she'd been hit. Then she realized the bullet had gone wide, ricocheting off the rocks. The two women rolled in the dirt, fighting for control of the weapon. Martha was younger and desperate, but Grace had years of dealing with violent situations from her social work days. She managed to get her hands on the gun, but Martha drove an elbow into her ribs, sending pain shooting through her body. "Captain!" Grace gasped, and the dog was there instantly, his jaws clamping down on Martha's arm. The woman screamed and released her grip on the gun, which went skittering across the rocky ground. Grace scrambled after it, her breath coming in short gasps. Behind her, she could hear Dolly trying to comfort the children, who were crying and confused by the violence. "It's okay, babies," Dolly whispered. "It's going to be okay." But Grace knew it wasn't going to be okay. Not yet. As she reached for the gun, she heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. A black SUV was racing toward them across the desert, and Grace's heart sank as she recognized the driver. Beauregard Winchester had come to finish the job himself. "Well, this is unfortunate," Beau said as he stepped out of the SUV, his own gun already drawn. "I had hoped this would be a simple accident. Desert heat, dehydration, tragic but natural. Now it's going to be a bit more complicated." Grace slowly stood up, the gun heavy in her hands. She'd never shot anyone in her life, but she'd do whatever it took to protect those children. "Let them go. Beau, this is between you and me." "Oh, I don't think so," Beau replied, his cultured voice carrying a chill that made Grace's skin crawl. "You see, you've all seen too much. Martha here has been careless, and now we have a real problem." Martha was sitting on the ground, cradling her bleeding arm where Captain had bitten her. "I'm sorry. Beau, they showed up out of nowhere." "Yes, well, we'll deal with that." Beau's eyes never left Grace. "You know, I've been doing this for 3 years now, helping desperate families, providing for children's medical needs. It's quite profitable. Actually, you're killing children for insurance money," Grace said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm solving problems," Beau corrected. "Sick children, families in poverty, communities struggling with the burden of caring for the less fortunate. I provide a service. You're a monster. I'm a businessman." Beau's smile was cold as winter. "And business is good. These 4 children will be worth almost $2 million when all is said and done, enough to fund my next charitable venture." Grace looked back at the children. Libby, the 8-year-old, was staring at Beau with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. She understood what was happening, even if the younger ones didn't. "You won't get away with this," Grace said. "People know where we are." "Do they?" Beau asked. "Your friend Janet Rodriguez won't be expecting to hear from you for hours. The local police think you're chasing shadows. And this is a very big desert, Ms. Mackenzie. Lots of places for people to disappear." Captain growled low in his throat, sensing the danger. Grace could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was measuring distances and angles. If she gave him the signal, he'd attack. But Beau was ready for that. "I wouldn't," Beau warned, seeing Grace's glance at the dog. "I'm quite a good shot, and I'd hate to have to put down such a beautiful animal before I deal with the rest of you." That's when Grace heard it, the faint sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. Her phone call to Janet had gotten through after all, and someone had taken her warning seriously. Beau heard it too, his expression darkening. "It seems our time is up. Martha, get the children into the van. We're leaving." "What about them?" Martha asked, gesturing at Grace and Dolly. "They're coming with us. Can't leave witnesses behind." Grace raised the gun she'd taken from Martha, her hands surprisingly steady. "I don't think so." "You won't shoot me," Beau said confidently. "You're not a killer, Miss Mackenzie. You're a former social worker who saves broken animals. You don't have it in you." He was right, and they both knew it. Grace had never taken a life, never wanted to. But as she looked at those 4 children, remembering Sarah and Marcus and the twins from the Henderson case, She felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not a killer, but I'm a protector. And I will not let you hurt these children." The helicopter was getting closer now, and Grace could see panic starting to creep into Beau's eyes. His carefully planned operation was falling apart, and desperate men made dangerous choices. "Last chance," he said, raising his own gun. "Step aside, or I'll put you down right here." Grace looked at Captain, who was coiled and ready to spring. She looked at Dolly, who was holding little Sammy like she'd never let him go. She looked at the 4 children who reminded her so much of the ones she'd failed to save. "No," she said simply. And then everything happened at once. The standoff lasted exactly 3 seconds before Captain made the decision for all of them. The German Shepherd exploded into motion with the lethal precision of his police training, launching himself at Beau Winchester with a snarl that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. Beau's gun went off, the shot wild and high, as 80 pounds of furious dogs slammed into his chest and drove him to the ground. Grace didn't hesitate. She dove toward the children, throwing herself over little Sammy as Martha scrambled for her own weapon. "Stay down!" she screamed to Dolly, who was already shielding Libby and Jack with her own body. The desert erupted into chaos. Captain and Beau rolled in the dirt. The dog's jaws locked around the man's gun arm while Beau screamed and tried to beat him off with his free hand. Martha had found her gun, but she couldn't get a clear shot with Captain and Beau wrestling in the dust. "Get him off me!" Beau shrieked, his cultured voice breaking into something primal and terrified. "Get him off!" Blood was streaming from the dog bites on his arm, and Grace could see the panic in his eyes. For the first time in years, Beauregard Winchester wasn't in control, and it was destroying him. Martha finally decided to risk the shot, raising her gun toward Captain. But Grace was faster. She'd kept hold of the weapon she'd taken earlier, and now she used it, not to kill, but to disarm. Her shot caught Martha in the shoulder, spinning the woman around and sending her gun flying into the rocks. "You bitch!" Martha screamed, clutching her wounded shoulder. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Grace replied, her voice deadly calm. "I'm protecting children from monsters." The helicopter was much closer now, close enough that Grace could see it was a police chopper, probably from the county sheriff's department. Someone had taken her warning seriously, after all. But it would be another few minutes before they could land, and a lot could happen in a few minutes. Beau managed to get his feet under him and tried to throw Captain off, but the dog's training was too thorough. Captain had been taught to hold suspects until backup arrived, and that's exactly what he was doing. Every time Beau tried to move, the dog adjusted his grip, applying just enough pressure to keep the man pinned without causing fatal damage. "Let me go," Beau gasped, his face red with exertion and fury. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." "I understand perfectly," Grace said, keeping her gun trained on Martha while watching Beau struggle. "You've been murdering children for insurance money. How many?" "Beau, how many families have you destroyed?" "They were dying anyway," Beau snarled, his mask of civility finally slipping completely. "Sick, poor, unwanted children. I gave their deaths meaning, purpose. I made them worth something." Dolly gasped from where she crouched with the children. "You're insane. I'm practical." Beau's voice rose to a shriek. "Do you know what it costs to keep sick children alive? The medical bills, the medications, the constant care. Most of these families can't afford it anyway. I was doing them a favor." Grace felt sick listening to him, but she also felt a cold satisfaction. He was confessing everything, and the helicopter's cameras were undoubtedly recording every word. "A favor," Grace's voice was ice cold. "You were doing them a favor by letting their children die of heat stroke in the desert." "It's quick," Beau insisted, still struggling against Captain's iron grip. "Quicker than cancer, quicker than most of the diseases these kids had. And the insurance money? The family's got the money. They could start over." "No, Beau," Grace said quietly. "You got the money. You're listed as the beneficiary on all those policies." For a moment, Beau stopped struggling, his face going pale. He'd revealed too much, and they both knew it. That's when Martha made her move. Despite her wounded shoulder, she lunged toward the rocks where her gun had fallen, desperation giving her strength. Grace swung her own weapon toward the woman, but Martha was already rolling behind cover. "Grace!" Dolly screamed. A shot rang out, and Grace felt something burn across her left arm. Martha had found her gun and was firing blind from behind the rocks, trying to create enough chaos to escape. But Martha had forgotten about the children. Libby Hayes was only 8 years old, but she'd been taking care of her younger siblings for months. She'd learned to think fast, to spot danger, to protect the people she loved. And right now, Martha was threatening her family. The little girl grabbed a rock the size of a softball and threw it with all her strength. Her aim was perfect. The rock caught Martha in the temple just as she was lining up another shot. The woman dropped like a sack of grain, her gun clattering away across the stone. "Nice throw, sweetheart," Grace called out, impressed despite the circumstances. "My daddy taught me," Libby replied, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "He said sometimes little people have to fight big monsters." The helicopter was circling now, its rotors whipping up clouds of dust and debris. Grace could see the tactical team preparing to fast rope down, but she wasn't sure they'd be in time. Beau was getting desperate, and desperate men were unpredictable. "This isn't over," Beau gasped, still pinned beneath Captain. "You think you've won, but you have no idea how deep this goes. I have partners, backers, people in high places who depend on this operation." "Then they can join you in prison," Grace replied. "You naive fool!" Beau's laugh was bitter and harsh. "Do you think I'm the only one? Do you think this stops with me? There are others more careful than I was, smarter, and they won't make the mistake of letting witnesses live." Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. How many Beau Winchesters were out there, preying on desperate families, turning children's lives into profit margins? That's when she heard little Sammy cough, a wet rattling sound that cut through her thoughts like a knife. The 5-year-old was getting worse, his small body unable to cope with the heat and stress much longer. "Dolly, how's he doing?" Grace called out. "Not good," Dolly replied, her voice tight with worry. "He's burning up, and his breathing's getting shallow." Grace made a decision that went against all tactical sense. She holstered her gun and moved toward the children, knowing she was making herself vulnerable but unable to ignore a child in distress. "What are you doing?" Beau gasped from beneath Captain. "Don't you dare turn your back on me." "You're not going anywhere," Grace replied, pulling out her phone. Still no signal. But she had a first aid app that worked offline. "Captain's got you handled." She knelt beside Sammy, whose small face was flushed with fever. His pulse was rapid and thready, classic signs of heat exhaustion progressing toward heat stroke. Without immediate intervention, he could die within the hour. "We need to cool him down," Grace said, pulling off her shirt to create shade. "Dolly, do you have any water left? Just a few sips in my bottle." Grace took the bottle and began applying small amounts of water to Sammy's wrists and forehead, trying to cool his core temperature. It wasn't much, but it might buy them the time they needed. "Hang in there, little man," she whispered. "Help's coming." The helicopter was finally landing, its rotors beginning to slow. Grace could see armed officers jumping out at tactical gear and weapons ready. But even as relief flooded through her, she knew Bo was right about one thing. This was bigger than just him. As the officers approached with weapons drawn, shouting commands for everyone to get down, Grace looked at the 4 children who had almost become victims of an unspeakable evil. They were alive. They were safe. But how many others weren't? "It's over, Bo," she said as the officers reached them. "No," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "It's just beginning." And despite their victory, despite the children's rescue, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that he might be right. The desert had given up its secrets today, but it held many more. And somewhere out there, other predators were watching, learning, adapting. The war for innocent lives was far from over. The next hour was a blur of paramedics, police officers, and federal agents who seemed to materialize from nowhere. Grace sat in the back of an ambulance, watching EMTs work on little Sammy while a paramedic stitched up the bullet graze on her arm. The boy was stable, but barely. Another 30 minutes in that desert heat would have killed him. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions." Detective Ray Morrison from the Cochise County Sheriff's Department looked tired, like a man who'd seen too much evil in his 20-year career. "Can you walk me through what happened here?" Grace told him everything, from Captain's strange behavior that morning to the shootout in the desert. Morrison took notes, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Jesus Christ," he muttered when she finished. "How long has this been going on?" "According to my contact at CPS, at least 3 years. Maybe longer." "We're going to need you to testify. You know that, right? This is going to be a big case. Federal charges. Probably multiple jurisdictions." Grace nodded, watching as Bo Winchester was loaded into a separate ambulance under heavy guard. The man who'd seemed so distinguished and charitable that morning looked broken now, his expensive clothes torn and bloodied, his silver hair matted with sweat and dirt. But it was his eyes that chilled her most, even in defeat, even facing life in prison. There was no remorse there, only calculation, like he was already planning his next move. "Detective Morrison," Grace said quietly. "He mentioned partners, backers. This isn't just him." "We know. FBI's already working that angle." Morrison glanced toward a group of federal agents interviewing Martha Sinclair. "Woman singing like a canary, trying to cut a deal. Apparently Winchester's operation was part of something bigger, a network of charitable organizations across the Southwest." Grace felt sick. "How many children?" "We don't know yet. Could be dozens, maybe more." That's when she heard the commotion from the federal agent's interview area. Martha Sinclair was shouting, her voice carrying across the desert. "You don't understand," Martha screamed at the FBI agents. "Bo's not the boss. He's just middle management. The real money comes from back east, from people you can't touch." One of the agents, a sharp-faced woman in her 40s, tried to calm Martha down. "We can protect you, but you need to give us names." "Protect me?" Martha laughed bitterly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. These people own judges, senators, police chiefs. They've been doing this for years, and nobody can stop them." "What people?" the agent pressed. "Give us names." Martha looked around wildly, as if expecting snipers to emerge from the rocks. "The Foundation," she whispered. "The Children's Medical Foundation of America. It's all a front. They identify targets, poor families with sick kids. Then they send in operators like Bo to make the approach." Grace felt her blood turn to ice. She'd heard of the Children's Medical Foundation. They were huge, with chapters in every state. They ran television commercials featuring sick children, raised millions in donations. Seemed like one of the most reputable charities in the country. "That's impossible," Detective Morrison said. "The foundation is legitimate. They help thousands of children every year." "Some of it's real," Martha continued, her voice getting higher and more frantic. "They do help some kids. It's perfect cover. But maybe 1 in 10 of their cases, the ones that are too expensive, too complicated. Those kids disappear. Heat stroke, drowning, car accidents, always something that looks natural." The FBI agent leaned forward. "You're saying they're running a systematic murder operation disguised as charity work?" "I'm saying they're running a business," Martha replied. "And dead children are more profitable than live ones if you know how to work the system." Grace couldn't listen anymore. She stood up from the ambulance, ignoring the paramedics' protests about her stitches, and walked over to where Dolly was sitting with the children. All 4 kids were being treated for dehydration, but they were alert and talking. They were going to be okay. "How are they doing?" Grace asked. "Better," Dolly replied, though her face showed the strain of the day's events. "The doctors say they'll make a full recovery. But Grace," she lowered her voice, "what that woman was saying about the foundation, I applied to them for help with the kids' medical bills. Last month, they turned me down, said the children didn't meet their criteria." Grace's stomach clenched. "Did they ask for detailed medical records?" "Everything, insurance information, family financial statements. Even asked about life insurance policies." Dolly's eyes widened as the implications hit her. "Oh my God! They were evaluating the children for profit potential," Grace finished grimly. "The foundation probably flagged your grandchildren as candidates for Winchester's operation." 8-year-old Libby looked up from her juice box. "Are the bad people going to come back for us?" Grace knelt down beside the little girl, choosing her words carefully. "No, sweetheart. The bad people are going to jail for a very long time. You're safe now." "What about other kids?" Libby's question was too mature for her age, but then again, the children had grown up fast in the last few hours. "Are there other bad people trying to hurt other kids?" Grace looked into those serious brown eyes and made a decision. She wouldn't lie to children, not anymore. Not after the Henderson case, not after today. Yes, she said quietly. There are other bad people out there. But there are good people, too. People who fight the bad ones. And sometimes, when we're very lucky, we have guardian angels watching over us. She looked at Captain, who was lying in the shade of the ambulance, still alert despite his exhaustion. The dog's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her heart swell with pride and gratitude. "Like, Captain?" Jack asked. "Exactly like Captain." That's when Detective Morrison approached with news that made Grace's blood run cold. "We just got word from the FBI field office," he said quietly. "Martha Sinclair was found dead in her transport vehicle 20 minutes ago. Apparent heart attack." Grace stared at him. She was 38 years old and healthy. People that age don't just have heart attacks. "Medical examiner will determine cause of death," Morrison replied. But his expression said he didn't believe it was natural any more than she did. "What I'm worried about now is your safety. If this goes as high as Sinclair claimed, you and the children could be targets. What kind of protection can you offer?" "Federal witness protection, if necessary. New identities, relocation, the works." Grace looked at Dolly and the children. The old woman had just gotten her grandchildren back, and now they might have to disappear entirely to stay safe. "There's another option," Morrison continued. "We could use you as bait." "Excuse me? If this organization is as big as Sinclair claimed, they'll want to clean up loose ends. That means coming after you and the kids. If we're ready for them." "Absolutely not," Grace said firmly. "I won't put children at risk again. The children would be protected, hidden away safe. It would just be you in the line of fire." Grace looked at Captain, who had raised his head at the tension in her voice. The dog's eyes were alert, ready for whatever came next. "How long would it take?" she asked. "Could be days, could be weeks. These people are careful, methodical. They don't move fast." Grace thought about Martha Sinclair, dead of a heart attack at 38. About the Children's Medical Foundation and its nationwide network. About all the children who might be targeted in the future if this conspiracy wasn't stopped. "I'll do it," she said. "But I want guarantees about the children's safety. And Captain stays with me." Morrison nodded. "That can be arranged." As the sun began to set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Grace Mackenzie made peace with her decision. She'd failed the Henderson children. But she wouldn't fail again. The monsters who preyed on the innocent were about to learn that some guardian angels bite back, and Captain, lying at her feet with his ears pricked for danger, seemed to approve. 3 months later, Grace Mackenzie stood in the kitchen of her desert ranch, watching 4 children help Dolly Patterson make Sunday dinner. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, that it was hard to believe they'd all been through hell together just 12 weeks ago. "Miss Grace, can you pass the flour?" Libby asked, her small hands covered in biscuit dough. At 8 years old, she'd appointed herself head baker, taking the responsibility as seriously as she took everything else. "Coming right up, sweetheart," Grace replied, handing over the bag and ruffling the girl's hair. The nightmares had stopped about a month ago, replaced by dreams of becoming a chef when she grew up. Jack was at the table, carefully setting places for 7 people, the 4 children, Dolly, Grace, and one special guest who was coming for dinner. At 7, he'd become the family's official greeter, shaking hands with every visitor like a little diplomat. Maggie and Sammy were in the living room, building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions with Captain's help. The German Shepherd lay patiently as the children draped blankets over his back, his tail wagging every time they giggled. "Hard to believe it's the same dog that nearly tore Bo Winchester apart," Detective Morrison had commented during his last visit. "He's like a different animal around those kids." Grace knew better. Captain wasn't different. He was exactly who he'd always been. A protector, a guardian, a soul that had found its purpose in keeping the innocent safe. The doorbell rang, and Jack immediately perked up. "I'll get it. Remember what we practiced?" Grace called after him. "Yes, ma'am. Ask who it is. Look through the peephole. Don't open the door unless I recognize them." The security measures had become second nature to all of them. The FBI's operation to catch the bigger fish behind Winchester's scheme was still ongoing, and until it was over, they had to be careful. But today's visitor was expected and welcome. "It's Judge Martinez," Jack called out, and Grace smiled as she heard the front door open. Elena Martinez had been the family court judge who'd fast-tracked the adoption proceedings, cutting through months of red tape to make Grace the children's legal guardian. She'd become a regular visitor, drawn by what she called the miracle family. "Afternoon, everyone," Judge Martinez said as she entered the kitchen, her arms full of grocery bags. "I brought dessert and some things for the pantry." "Elena, you don't need to keep bringing us food," Grace protested, but she was smiling. The judge had become like an honorary aunt to the children. "Nonsense. It takes a village, as they say." Elena began unpacking the bags, revealing ice cream, fresh fruit, and enough groceries to feed an army. "Besides, I never had children of my own. You're letting me live vicariously." Dolly wiped her hands on her apron and hugged the judge. At 72, Dolly had officially moved in as the children's grandmother figure, bringing wisdom, stability, and the world's best chocolate chip cookies to their makeshift family. "Any word on the investigation?" Grace asked quietly, keeping her voice low so the children wouldn't hear. Elena's expression grew serious. The FBI arrested 6 more people last week, 3 in Texas, 2 in New Mexico, 1 in California, all running similar operations to Winchester's, and the Foundation, still being investigated. It's complicated. They really do help thousands of children legitimately. The criminal operation seems to have been a shadow network within the larger organization." Grace nodded. It had taken weeks to sort out the truth from the lies, but the picture that emerged was staggering. The Children's Medical Foundation's legitimate work provided perfect cover for a much smaller, more sinister operation that identified vulnerable families and profitable opportunities. What about Winchester himself? Plea deal fell through. He's going to trial, probably facing multiple life sentences. But Grace? Elena lowered her voice even further. "He's still claiming he was just following orders. Says the real architects of this thing are still out there." A chill ran down Grace's spine, but before she could respond, Sammy came running into the kitchen with Captain close behind. Miss Grace, Captain found something in the yard." Grace's blood turned to ice. "What did he find, baby?" "A box with a ribbon on it." Every adult in the room went tense. They'd had no deliveries scheduled, and unexpected packages were treated as potential threats. "Kids, stay inside," Grace said firmly. "Elena, can you keep an eye on them?" "Of course, Grace, be careful." Grace stepped onto the front porch with Captain at her side. Sure enough, there was a small package by the front gate. Wrapped in brown paper with a red ribbon, the dog's hackles were raised, his nose working the air. "What do you think, boy, friend, or foe?" Captain whined low in his throat. Not quite a warning, but definitely suspicious. Grace called Detective Morrison, who arrived with a bomb squad 20 minutes later. The package turned out to be harmless, a child's toy with a note that made Grace's hands shake. "For the children who got away, there are others who won't be so lucky. The Foundation's work continues." It wasn't signed, but the message was clear. The larger conspiracy was still active, still hunting vulnerable children, still turning their suffering into profit. That evening, after the police had left and the children were in bed, Grace sat on her front porch with Captain and a cup of coffee, watching the stars emerge in the desert sky. "You know what this means, don't you, boy?" she said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We can't just sit here and hope they leave us alone." Captain looked at her with those intelligent brown eyes, and Grace could swear she saw understanding there. The next morning, Grace made a phone call that changed everything. "Detective Morrison, it's Grace Mackenzie. I want to go back to work. Grace, you know you're still in witness protection. It's not safe. I don't want to hide anymore. I want to help catch these people." There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Morrison spoke. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to go back to social work. Work with the FBI. Help identify families who might be targeted. Use my experience to spot the signs. Intervene before children get hurt. That's dangerous work. You'd essentially be painting a target on your back." Grace looked through the kitchen window, where the 4 children were eating breakfast and laughing at something Dolly had said. They were safe, loved, and thriving. But somewhere out there, other children weren't so lucky. "Sometimes doing the right thing is dangerous," she said. "Besides, I won't be alone." As if summoned by her words, Captain appeared at her side, his tail wagging. 6 months later, Grace Mackenzie was back in the field as a special consultant to the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. Her job was to identify families who might be targeted by the Foundation's shadow network and to help coordinate protection for vulnerable children. Captain had been officially certified as a therapy dog, his presence helping traumatized children feel safe enough to tell their stories. But Grace knew his real value went far beyond therapy. The dog's instincts had saved 4 lives in the desert, and they continued to guide her work every day. The investigation had grown into the largest child protection operation in FBI history. Over 24 arrests had been made across 8 states, and the Children's Medical Foundation had been completely restructured under federal oversight. But Grace knew it wasn't over. Evil like this didn't disappear overnight. It adapted, evolved, found new ways to prey on the innocent. On a warm Arizona evening, exactly 1 year after the desert rescue, Grace sat on her porch with her family. Dolly was teaching Maggie how to knit. Jack was reading a book about police dogs. Libby was writing in the journal she'd started keeping, documenting their adventures. And Sammy was asleep in Grace's lap, exhausted from a day of play. Captain lay at their feet, his ears pricked for any sound that might signal danger. But tonight, all was peaceful. "Miss Grace," Libby said, looking up from her journal, "do you think there are other kids out there who need help like we did?" Grace considered her answer carefully. She'd promised never to lie to these children again. "Yes, sweetheart, there are. Are you going to help them?" "We're going to try." Libby nodded solemnly, then returned to her writing. A few minutes later, she brought her journal over to Grace. "I wrote something for you," she said shyly. Grace read the child's careful handwriting. "Some people think angels have wings and live in heaven, but I know better. Angels have 4 legs and brown eyes, and they bark when bad people come around. Angels also have kind hearts and never give up on kids who need help. My angel's name is Captain, and my other angel's name is Miss Grace. They saved me and my brothers and sister, and now they're going to save other kids too, because that's what angels do." Grace felt tears sting her eyes as she pulled Libby into a hug. "That's beautiful, honey." "It's true," Libby said simply. "You and Captain are our guardian angels." As the desert stars emerged overhead, Grace Mackenzie held her chosen daughter close and made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it lasted, she and Captain would keep fighting for the innocent. Because sometimes, when the world gets dark and children need protecting, guardian angels come in unexpected forms. And sometimes, when you're very lucky, they have 4 paws and hearts big enough to save the world. Home, Grace thought, looking at her family, truly is where the heart is. And her heart had found its home at last. The desert. Angel. Dear friends, there's something powerful about a dog's unwavering loyalty that reminds us what really matters in life. Captain didn't just save 4 children in that desert. He showed us that love, protection, and second chances can come from the most unexpected places. As we get older, we understand that family isn't always about blood relations. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to stand by us, who refuse to give up when times get tough, who see our worth when we can't see it ourselves. Grace found her purpose again at 45, proving it's never too late to make a difference. Dolly, at 72, became a grandmother to children who weren't even hers, showing that love multiplies when we open our hearts. These children learned that broken families can be rebuilt stronger than before, and that trust, once lost, can be found again. In a world that often feels cold and calculating, their story reminds us that good still triumphs over evil, that loyalty still matters, and that the bonds we choose can be stronger than the ones we're born with. Sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our biggest challenges. What unexpected blessing has come into your life during your golden years? Have you ever experienced the unconditional loyalty of a pet that changed your perspective? Please share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how love found you when you needed it most.